Hello everyone. Finally, I think I have my PC in good enough shape to actually be able to make a couple of commentaries. And the first thing I will be featuring is the Montana. Now, the game client, or the patch we're playing, is the Hotfix for 0.8.0. Now, there's been a lot of changes in the game, and as of right now, well, playing DD seems to be nigh impossible. I played Grozovoi, I played a few other DDs. Z52, for example, with AA build has been surprisingly good. Grozovoi with full AA build has been very good. But ultimately, regardless of how good you are at shooting down planes, the current meta is still extremely poisonous for any sort of DD play. The issue is, of course, not only are there planes everywhere and there's rocket planes that are so easy to deal damage to DDs with, but there's also the fact that the best ships at dealing with planes also all happen to carry radar. So you see a lot of Salem, you see a lot of Des Moines, you see Minotaurs. They might not have radar, but they're still painful. There's Worcester, there's Seattle, there's a lot of rough ships to deal with. So as of late, I've been playing a lot of battleship and cruiser in general because, well, DD gameplay just seems very rough as long as the rocket planes are the way they are. Now, what's interesting here is, well, first of all, I've changed my focus on the right side of my ship. If you look at the bottom left, you can actually see on what side my AA is focused, on the right or left side, port or starboard, and so forth. But sadly, it doesn't show in replays. This is a replay, and sadly, it doesn't show when I switch sides. But I am running manual AA, because that's probably one of the strongest AA perks ever since the rework. AFT has kind of been neutered, it's not nearly as powerful. BFT is pretty okay for a 3-pointer, especially on DDs that also benefit from the gun reload. But most of the time on cruisers and battleships, I've found myself preferring manual AA the most, because that ability to reinforce the side gives you such a direct increase in DPM. And you see, of course, the damage that you can deal to these squads, especially if they try to kill someone else on your AA focused side, or even if they're trying to drop you. Not only does it manual AA makes it quicker to switch sides, but it also increases the damage you deal on the side. So as long as you're paying attention and you're actively switching the side with that AA focus, you actually benefit a lot from running manual AA on pretty much every single build. On the other hand, though, a perk that has lost a lot of value is Concealment Expert. Not just because the perk itself has been nerfed, but because there's so many DDs, so many CVs in the game right now. So you are pretty much constantly spotted. In fact, you might have noticed that I'm not running any Concealment Expert on this build. And I love Concealment Expert on pretty much every single ship, but on this Montana, I'm not running it. I'm also not running this Concealment module. I'm instead running the Legendary module. Now, the reason for running this Legendary module is the same as the reason why I'm not running Concealment Expert. Stealth, Concealment as value has greatly dropped. Like, the value of that perk, the value of that stat has dropped so hard because of the constant plane spotting everywhere. So instead, I've actually been experimenting running this Legendary module, which not only does it give you better rudder shift, but it also reduces your flooding and fire duration. And that's of course something the carriers are extremely good at, starting fires and making you flood. And the faster rudder shift that helps you in dodging the torpedoes. So ultimately, surprisingly, a Legendary module that I did not value at all before 0.8.0 has suddenly gained a lot of value in this latest patch on the Montana. In similar ways, other modules, Legendary modules that weren't that powerful before this because they gave up concealment, have now gained a lot of value. Not because they themselves have in any way been buffed, but simply because concealment as a value, as a stat, has dropped so much. Because, well, there's planes flying your way all the time. My concealment is actually 17.3 kilometers with this build, because I'm not running Concealment Expert or the Stealth module, so I am very easy to spot from every angle. But especially in a Montana, in a battleship, this is something you can play around. Battleships have always been one of the few ships where, well, this whole concealment thing isn't the end of the world because you have so much armor. In general, you don't get randomly citadel from some weird angle, and as long as you're paying attention, you shouldn't really be able to get punished that hard. Most of the time, people won't even bother to shoot too much at an angled battleship unless they're of course HE spamming. Here though, we need to get some caps. We have no objectives. The enemy is up a good 170 points. We're down a ship. Our DDs are struggling to get anything done. The enemy DD tried to push in, and you saw, I don't know if you guys noticed, the enemy DD tried to push in, so my carrier flew past him with a couple of dive bombers and left the fighter squad to hover right on top of him, and because of all that spotting, he got killed. He was harassed earlier as well, and I mean, that goes back and forth both ways. DDs are just having such a rough time with this patch, and I generally don't like this patch at all, because they didn't take, I feel like Wargaming completely ignored all the feedback that we gave about the rocket planes and how the rocket planes are just too powerful against DDs, and I feel all that feedback was just ignored. And now we have a meta where the only place you will find multiple DDs is in ranked. The average game is basically like this one. There's one DD maybe on each side, and the rest are cruisers and battleships. Obviously that's not an ideal solution. Still though, I'm pushing the cap because we need some objectives. Using the spotter plane to see if I can maybe reset on that Seattle in A. No chance. Can I get some shots on these guys behind the island? No chance. I am pushing into the cap. The interesting thing is though, when you have a concealment that's so bad as the one I have now, it's unlikely you get spotted even while firing. In this case I was plane spotted, once again, carrier games, but there's a high probability that if you're not spotted while firing, or not spotted normally, then you're not going to be spotted while firing either. The good thing about a position like this is, of course, when I push in like this, the rest of my team also tends to follow. Well, they see someone leading the charge, they tend to follow it up a fair bit. The enemy team has fairly good positions behind the island. I can't lob my shells over it. We don't really have vision of A yet. So at this point, I'm just going to hold position, because this is a good position. It provides crossfire towards B and A. I can shoot the guys if they try to push towards my team at B, and in general, I'm locking down the C cap as well. So, as a position, I think this is very valuable. Montana turns out. Do I catch him? I do, but not a single citadel. He is he cancelling his turn? If he keeps going in a straight line, I'm just going to punish him again. Montana citadel is kind of iffy. You'd kind of need a perfect broadside to get it. But if you do get that flat perfect broadside, especially at long ranges where you can really utilize plunging fire, it is surprisingly vulnerable. This guy slows down and makes it very easy. You shouldn't really not do that in a Montana. I am of course running the 3 million dispersion module, which improves the dispersion of my battleship. I am not running the 500,000 credits dispersion module, but I think I'm running AA in fact. I'm gonna have to double check that, but I'm not sure that's gonna be anything like a final build running that AA module, because, well, carrier presence in the game is very inflated right now. Everyone wants to check out the new gimmick, everyone wants to check out the new, basically the new class, so there's a lot more carriers than I expect to see, let's say, a month or two from now. That's why I've been quite hesitant to really recommend any builds, because any builds that you should run right now should be quite heavily AA focused. But the problem is, if I make some hour-long vid where I show all my recommended builds for all my different ships right now, well, a lot of them are going to be AA focused, and a month from now that vid is going to be completely out of date, because, as I mentioned, I don't expect to see quite as much carrier players in a month, or well, in two, even less so. It's a fad, and considering how they just completely reworked the class, it's not a surprising fad, but people will heavily overreact. Midway comes in for the drop. Once again, I have my priority set to the right side, so he's basically dropping straight through my priority. He's behind the island, so I can't really hit him right now. I start turning in because he's obviously going for me, and he needs to drop right behind the island, and if I turn in, the torpedoes should not have time to arm, which they do not. One of the back torps arm, but those torps deal so little damage. You note that I've managed to switch the AA priority from the right to the left side very quickly, and that is of course the benefit of manual AA. And honestly, manual AA, out of all the new AA perks, it's probably the best one. It's just, as long as you keep actively switching sides, the benefits it gives are just so good. We got B control and C control. We're ahead in points. I still like my position. I'm not really in a hurry to move. I can maybe lob some shells over on the enemy team. No spotter plane makes it a bit awkward. He's in fact accelerating more than I thought. Trying to hit the Zao even though the lock-on says the Friedrich Grosse. Sadly, not quite where I hoped. You might note that I've dealt 20,000 plane damage, even though I haven't really been focused that much by a carrier, and that is of course the benefit of the Montana AA, and of course this hotfix that was released today, which has greatly enhanced your AA capabilities. The problem is though that it's also greatly nerfed the AA at tier 7s and below. So right now if you want to play any sort of AA ship, you want to play a tier 8 or higher. The lower tier ones have gotten absolutely gutted. So Wargaming basically needs to release a hotfix for the hotfix, which is once again a bit backwards. Taking a fair bit of punishment, so I'm moving. You note that the fire, by the way, is lasting a very short time on me, and that is of course the power of running this legendary module, which reduces the fire duration. And then I run the 1 million basics of survivability style module that also reduces it, and I run the fire reduction flag, and I run, as I said, basics of survivability, the perk itself. So all of those combined are reducing the fire duration significantly and the flooding duration significantly as well. So if a carrier were to focus me, not only with the manual AA am I able to greatly shred and damage his planes, but the actual dot damage that he can deal to me is greatly reduced as well. So as a trade-off, giving up concealment in this carrier heavy meta, this build does seem to be quite effective and quite powerful. Is it something I will still be running 2 months from now when the carrier population has greatly dropped off? Debatable. Very questionable. But as of right now, very good. Very, very good. They keep lobbing shells at me or the island. I'm being a bit careful so I'm not giving that flat broadside we saw that Montana gave me earlier, because you saw exactly what happens if you do that. On the bright side, they don't have too many battleships remaining. A Friedrich Grosse on my right. Once again, with manual AA I've switched side. If he goes through one of my flak clouds with those planes, he's gonna lose a big bunch of them. He's trying to drop me now, but all his planes are pretty much being shot down. Is that enough lead? I think I'm aiming a bit too high. Dispersion wasn't exactly doing me any favors either, so the Salem does get away. The Friedrich Grosse does get killed by the midway, so the only real threat I have that's preventing me from pushing up to be the way I would like is actually this North Carolina. The North Carolina, of course, has 406mm guns with great dispersion. If I were to give him full broadside, pushing up to this cap in the north, or pushing up towards B the way I would like to, then he would quite easily be able to citadel me from that angle, without any issues in fact. So I have to be surprisingly careful with what I do here. One thing that you need to keep in mind with this current patch though, especially when you got these double carrier games, is that you simply can't split off too much. Now, this is even with this quite AA strong build that I'm running and this dot resistant build. If I split up, the non-stop plane spam will get me killed eventually. And especially if you got good AA, you of course want to support your team as well, because you can help them out and you can protect them against the incoming strikes. So do not split up. It's different if there's no carrier in the match, but with the abundance of carriers right now, you do want to be a part of your team. I see a lot of ships that are being over-aggressive, or they're just splitting off, or they're doing a bunch of silly things that, especially against these new rework carriers, is just a really bad idea. North Carolina is giving broadside. I really want to get rid of this guy, because as long as he sits there, as I mentioned, it's too easy. I want to push there where my crosshair is pointing right now, because I know there's cruisers behind the island. But as long as he's sitting here, it makes it very awkward. 2 overpens, sadly. Looks like someone is lobbing shells over the island. I'm gonna see if I can catch him, sail him. I overmatch most of the Salem armor, so I'm actually gonna switch to focusing him now, because a Salem, just like the Des Moines, can't really gunboat in the open at this sort of close range. Shikakaka is coming in for a drop, but once again I've switched my AA focus to the right side, So he's basically flying through all of my AA to get to me. And at this point my AA damage, my plane damage, is already well over 40,000. I also managed to rack up 2 million potential simply because of holding C and just holding that strong position. And of course we're approaching 200,000 damage, which is what really gives us that XP just from, well, shooting everything that moves. You don't really have to care too much about what you shoot at with this Montana build, because normally you try to play stealthy, you try to ambush ships, you try to catch them off guard, but when you run this build it does give you a fair amount of freedom because you're spotted all the time, so it doesn't really matter if you're shooting or not, you're gonna be spotted regardless. So just throw out shells left, right and center as much as you want. There's no real downside to it. The Salem goes down, gives me too much broadside. The Seattle suffers from the same issue, he doesn't really have much armor, and if he tries to use his front guns he will expose his Citadel to me. Sadly that NC is still alive, he still hasn't been dealt with, so I still can't really push it nose in the way I would like. You saw him shooting at me right there, he wants to kill me, so I have to maintain my angling against him for the time being. In the meanwhile though, we're just gonna keep lobbing shells at this Seattle. Sooner or later we will kill him. And we will kill him far sooner than he can kill me. My superstructure is quite saturated as well already, so I'm not taking too much damage. Montana central deck is also very resistant to that IFHE. It looks like the carrier is going in for a drop. You note that he's flying his planes around the left side. So rather than turn my entire ship around, I'm just gonna switch my manual AA focus from the right side over to the left. And you can notice the bottom left, you saw how it switched sides, and now my AA is going to be focused on those incoming planes as they try to flank in on me. Seattle finally gives us that broadside we were hoping for. And this guy tries to drive through all my flak. I turn into the planes to try to dodge any incoming torpedoes. I manage to turn in time to dodge them. The planes get shredded, and at the same time I also kill off the Seattle. At this point the enemy team doesn't really have much going for them anymore. I'm trying to get some snipe volleys in on the midway, but we have pretty much secured the game. I still have a final heal, I'm not using it of course, because as when you run Adrenaline Rush you don't really want to spend your last heal if you can avoid it, because the lower health you are, the faster you reload and the more damage you deal. And surprisingly our Fletcher managed to survive all the way to the end of the game, so well done to him for actually managing to stay alive in a match that wasn't exactly kind to him. Looking at the detailed report, 230, well, or the score screen, 236,000 damage, 24k XP, and that's of course because there's the 200% bonus to the win. Fireproof and Dreadnought, not surprising, because we did a lot of tanking, and of course high caliber, because, well, we did a lot of killing as well. 26 planes shot down in the meantime. Team score wise, 3.4k base XP. Only 2 kills, but also 26 plane kills, and we got the cap, and in general the damage I dealt was quite heavily focused on the cruisers as well, so it gave us a nice huge chunk of that base XP that we were looking for. Moving on to the detailed report, we have, well, 87 hits, 236, pretty good average damage. You note the ships that I was shooting at, Salem, Seattle, St. Louis, Zao, a lot of cruisers being blapped because, well, it's a very heavy cruiser meta right now, and the Montana is of course quite good at dealing with these cruisers because 12 accurate guns with a fairly fast reload as well, it's quite good at dealing with them. The incoming damage, well, a lot of we took some rockets, we took some torps, but not really that much carrier focus because, well, the carriers don't have a good time dealing with us. 5 fires, 42.6k damage. I don't think I damage conned a single time this game. You might go back and check it, but I'm pretty sure I didn't use a damage con a single time. And that's because running this fire prevention build, or this super tanky build with fire prevention, the fires really aren't that big of a deal. And 42k easily healable damage from 5 fires, that's really not a big deal when you're sailing around with 100,000 damage, is it? So very tanky, very powerful build for the current meta, and I assume we're going to be seeing a lot of these builds that are basically just gonna well, that are basically going to be discovered or rediscovered simply because of how strange the current meta is with all these carriers and all this dot damage flying back and forth. Another similar legendary module that I'm looking at is the Hindenburg one, but I'm still not convinced if that one would work out. Anyway, let me show you guys my recommended build for this ship. Right, as usual, I will start off with the modules. Oh well, actually the UI needs to apparently have a break to load. This is something that's been introduced with 0.8.0, and that's the UI randomly freezing up. And that is extremely annoying and something that's been happening to a lot of people. Regardless of how good your PC is, it just randomly, the UI just completely locks up, and that's been very frustrating. Anyways, basic consumable wise, improved damage control, premium heal, get them both. And finally, if you can afford it, the spotting aircraft. I don't really rate the fighter. You can run the fighter if you want, but personally I think the spotting aircraft is better for punishing all those smoked up ships. And of course lobbing shells over islands and such. Upgrade wise, turret survival. You can run auxiliary as well, but the Montana does sometimes suffer some hits to its turrets. Quite rare though. I think either one of these two mods is perfectly fine. Additional tankiness from damage control. And this is one, well, this AA Guns mod, this mod is actually fantastic. This is a great mod on pretty much every single ship. What it does is it adds 2 explosions to every single salvo that your AA throws out. If you hover your mouse or your AA defense, you can see these salvos and you can see the long range. Normally this would throw out 8 explosions per salvo, and this would be 12 explosions by salvo. But because I run this, it's instead 10 and 14, and it's a lot of flak to fly through. It is a lot of flak to fly through. The hit probability is only 75%, but considering how much flak you have, it just means that you're basically covering the entire sky, because it's not that accurate, but you throw out a lot of it. And of course this continuous damage as well means that even if your flak is missing, you're still doing a ton of damage. But this is one of those that really good right now with all the carriers, fantastic in the current meta, might not be quite as valuable in a couple of months as I mentioned, but for the current meta, amazing. Well, actually, I don't really see myself using any other module here. So Montana is one of those ships where this is absolutely going to be great. There are other battleships where you can run an improved dispersion mod instead, and on those I would probably switch it out later. But on the Montana, this is probably going to stay meta for a very long time because of how powerful it is. Upgrade wise, damage control system mod 2. Now normally I would run steering gears, but the thing is, we're running the legendary module, which is enhanced damage control system, which reduces fire by 15, flooding by 30%, and more importantly, it also gives us 30% rudder shift. So normally your rudder shift is around 17 point something seconds, and that's why I usually run the rudder shift, because it's so awful. Like the default one is so bad. But you can get away with running damage control. Actually, no, it's the default one is something like 20. That's what it was way over 20. Let's demount this so we can show you guys. That's the default rudder shift, 22.2 seconds. So normally I would run this one just to cut it down to about 17 seconds or so. But because this legendary one gives us so much rudder shift, I feel confident enough to get away with also slotting damage control system mod 2 here. So we get 15 fire and 15 flooding, and then we get an additional 15 fire and 30% flooding just from running these two mods on top of each other. And then finally, better dispersion, which is especially good considering how much long range you're shooting now in the carrier meta, because it's so hard to really push anywhere and people are so hesitant to push anywhere. So there's a lot of long range skirmishing going on. So this already gives us a significant amount of damage reduction. Then we get to the captain build. I am running George Doe, and that's mostly because I like to improve turret traverse from expert marksman. Priority target, adrenaline rush, superintendent, and fire prevention. That would be my basic 10-point build. When you got 14 points, build manual AA. It reduces the time it changed to for your AA to switch sides or sector reinforcement. It reduces it from about 12 to 9.6 something. I guess it's rounded down to 10 seconds here, or rounded up here. But basically it cuts away 2 seconds in the time, and more importantly it also increases the sector reinforcement, so your AAs fundamentally more powerful on the side that is reinforced. So that's the 14 pointer, and then 16 points is Expert Marksman, and then the last 3 points put into Basics of Survivability, and here you get another 15% fire and 15% flooding. Then we add in the flags, and here you can reduce, once again, flooding by another 20% and fires by another 20%. So you guys understand just how many of these we're stacking on top of each other to make this Montana so resistant to all this fire and flooding damage. And all of this synergizes so well into this current meta, which is so dot heavy, that it actually ends up working surprisingly well. And of course, additional tanking, faster consumable usage, and better AA. I would say these are the bread and butter flags of this current set. I also run speed and secondaries, but that's not nearly as important, and then whatever economical flags you want to run. Ultimately though, that's been my Montana build that I haven't run it for long. Basically, this hotfix today kind of threw things around. If you guys want to, if I can show you guys a quick example of how they kind of messed this up. Let's switch to battleships. Let's switch American battleships just to show you an example. So we got the Montana. You can see how the flak basically deals 1.1k and 1.8k per puff. Seems good. Then we go to the Iowa, and you can see it deals about 1.1k and 1.8k still. Okay, makes sense, makes sense. North Carolina, 1.1k, 1.8k. Once again, these flak explosions are very consistent at tier 8, 9, and 10. And then we jump down to the Colorado, which is tier 7. And suddenly the flak that did 1.1k deals 300. And the flak that did 1.8k deals less than 400. So obviously this kind of massive gap between tier 7 and tier 8 is no doubt not intended and something they kind of messed up and accidentally added, but it keeps going like this at the low tiers. All of them have non-existent flak damage and they don't have enough just DPS to compensate either. So the current gap between tier 7 and tier 8 AA is absolutely gigantic and obviously not intended. So if you want to fly any or want to play any sort of AA builds, the low tier AA builds are pretty much all completely screwed right now, and we can only hope that this thing will be hotfixed as soon as possible. Anyway, that was my Montana very early commentary in this latest hotfix. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and hopefully I will get back on track with making bids now that I hopefully got my system sorted and working. Take care, and I'll talk to you guys next time.